So to introduce myself again, I'm Rachel Hosker. I'm Deputy Head of Special Collections and Archives Manager for the University of Edinburgh, based at the Centre for Research Collections. And as you can see, the weather in Edinburgh is being sunny behind me, so I have an angelic hue. So bear with us. Again, if we have any technology issues, please bear with us as well. Okay, I think we will get started. So this session is looking at digital history projects, and from what you saw, which has been created with these particular tools, it's great to have that output, but then what do you do with it? How do you then create exciting opportunities, push research further? How do you actually have fun with it in a research context as well? So I have three of our wonderful colleagues from the University of Virginia and Mount Vernon joining us for this session. James Zambuski, Director of the Centre for Digital History at Mount Vernon, Randy Flaherty, at the Special Collections Librarian at the University of Virginia Law Library, and Laura Moulds, who's Head of Digital Scholarship and Preservation at the University of Virginia Law Library as well. So welcome to you all. I'm quite excited about this session. Can I just remind everybody of the community rules, that we're all kind, add the questions into the chat. There's no such thing as a daft question. If you're thinking it, someone else will be as well. I would also remind you, use the hashtag on Twitter. If someone said something really exciting or interesting, then tweet away. We also have the Slack channel for the breaks to raise questions in, which we will follow up. We've got people monitoring that, and we will follow up on those questions. So use the chat here to put any questions in that you want to ask us. But I think we'll kick off. We're picking up on some of the things that we found from yesterday, some of the things that Randy and Lauren and Jim all talked about, which was the impact that having this content and this tools at scale has on research, has on engagement with the research agenda, and improvement in the time taken to actually get resources up there, but also get into that content. Do one of you want to comment on that?
Well, I guess, could you repeat that question really quick?
Sure. Yeah. So I was thinking about what you all said yesterday about the product of these tools allows you to then engage with researchers, create resources quickly. I'm thinking particularly on the website of the Law Library, create these almost exhibition pieces, but also rich content for engagement. What does that actually mean in terms of the pace of engagement and how far people can go with the research into these things?
So I guess maybe to set the stage, I think one of the questions that we asked when we were creating this site was, and we've been talking about this throughout this workshop, is what can we do beyond simply digitization, dumping things on the internet? What can we do simply beyond really quite powerful computationally assisted technologies what can we do to make these documents come alive and become accessible? And so, the question we asked was, how can we leverage new technology to digitize and machine read these vast corpus of material, but then also how can we foster new research? How can we give voice to these really incredible stories, the words of people that we're finding within these documents, and open them up, I guess, is sort of the first question we had. And then a host of other things is creating what we've called this SCOAS website, as opposed to simply a database, as opposed to simply being an exhibition. What we've tried to understand what we were building was a research platform. And so what we mean by that is lots of different opportunities and access points into information about the documents in our collection, alongside the tools that people will regularly use in an open, sort of understandable way to directly access qualitatively the documents that they're most interested in or know might exist in our collection.
Well, and I think what we touched on in the last panel, actually, I think Lauren mentioned this, is thinking about our various audiences, like who are we speaking to with this project? And that was really key. And we've been thinking about that all along. We still think about it all the time. And on the one hand is sort of that base level researcher who's interested in just finding documents and going about on their own way. And the initial way that, as I said yesterday, the initial way that we approached this was building compound PDFs that would be served out in a universal viewer. And we discovered very quickly, well, not very quickly, but we ran into a roadblock when we had a 350-page document from, I think, 1759 that would just not load. And we knew that we were going to encounter this down the road. How are we going to fix this? And so part of our strategy then was like, okay, how do we leverage the best technology out there? And it turns out you all were using it in Edinburgh at that point in order to make these documents available. But then we also were thinking about how do we sell this to researchers who are more specialized in the 18th century in the Atlantic world? How do we organize the collection, create the kind of exhibitions that you were talking about, Rachel, to facilitate that kind of work? How, and Lauren mentioned this in the last session here, how do we sell this to administrators? This is a viable project. You know, the University of Virginia School of Law is designed to train American lawyers in American law. Here we've got a project that is about 18th century Atlantic world, 18th century Scotland, which is a civil law society whose values is much different than a common law society. And so what's the import there for the university's investment in a project like that? And you know, part of the ways that we were able to accomplish that is both from a research side. I think, as Risa Golubov said quite nicely yesterday, that, you know, historians are interested in this kind of stuff, but also showing the applications of the kinds of workflows and technological tools we're using to other projects that would benefit both UVA, the law school individually, but also the wider university system and a lot of folks here who are attending this conference today. And then there's the other piece, thinking about the student piece. You know, how can we use this project as a way to educate students in digital history and digital humanities? How do we give them practical experience so that they can actually be part of the process of building the database and the project itself? Thinking about those different kind of constituencies has helped us shape the project and make certain choices along the way that I think has gotten the project where it is today.
You did make me, sorry. No, I was just going to say, you did make me laugh when you said that 750-page PDF. It just makes me think of the massive volume of session papers and going bang on the desk with that, but you're doing it in a digital sense as well. So go ahead, Randy.
And I think that was like one of our only volumes that was actually still bound, right? I mean, it was like a double whammy there. But yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the point about reaching your audience and sort of, you know, our strategy there has really been, we all come from history backgrounds, to reach out to sort of these consortium groups like Almohandro to try to present there, to try to you know, get the word out, hear feedback, things like that. And just one thing that we've sort of faced, as Jim was talking about, this is a surprising collection for, you know, an American library to have. We are sort of trying to frame it on our site as these are, like, you know, Atlantic history, you know, windows into Atlantic history, even American history. And so the sort of the surprising aspect of this is a new source, you know, that can be really wonderful for things like when you're doing a grant application or you're trying to sort of show your value. This is something new. It's also, it can be hard because people aren't, you know, there's like, people have to learn, like, you know, it's in some ways a barrier to people jumping in to using your site because it is new. So you're sort of dealing with those two factors that can be challenging.
Can I add one really quick thing?
Sure.
And what we had been talking about with, and Jim mentioned, was about explaining this not simply to admin, but basically anyone. If you look at, you know, an example document from the Court of Session and say, and we say we've got 60 boxes of these Scottish Court of Session documents, and we want to digitize them all and make them super accessible and do a ton of work to make them awesome. Like, everyone looks at you like, these are super boring. Why would you ever use them? And how is this even remotely relevant to what we do at the law school, let alone in Virginia? And so that was, in terms of startup costs, we think of all these sort of cash, and we think of staff, and we think of, but it's like one of them was just sort of convincing people besides the three of us, that this was actually worthwhile. So obviously, when you go through, some collections are immediately, they present themselves immediately as valuable, and ours were, to us, eventually were quite valuable. It just took that sort of, we had to do a lot of legwork to convince others initially that this is something worth your time.
Absolutely. We had the same problem in Edinburgh, where this stuff, it's about here, and trying to convince, because they're not pretty. They're not at all pretty documents. They're structured, but it's lots of print and lots of words, and it's dense, and people go, oh, it's too much to go through, you know. But following on from that exact point and what Randy was saying, Kyle's come up with a question. So can you talk more about how you might teach workflows and process to advanced undergrad or grad students in a digital humanities class using these tools? And what tasks could they do? Beyond, you know, what would be beyond what you could do in a classroom? How does it take it beyond the classroom once you've taught them those skills?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll say this is from Kyle Roberts, who's at the American Philosophical Society, and he and his partner, Ben Banghurst, have a great project on the Maryland Loyalist claims. So you should Google those folks and check out that site, because they've been working very hard to digitize another very key resource for early American history, and they've been doing some great work there. But it's a terrific question, and actually I've been thinking about it a lot these days, in part because there have been things that have been mulling about my mind since I finished my postdoc at UVA Law and moved over to Mount Vernon. It's how do we create courses, as Kyle has alluded to, and how do we build opportunities to educate students in digital history and digital humanities around projects like this. And Lauren and I taught a digital history course that was a hybrid course for undergraduates and graduates when I was there. And we got some ideas from that. And that was much more of a kind of dip your toe in the water kind of course, and sort of big picture ideas about digital history and the humanities. What we've begun to do at Mount Vernon, and building off of that stuff there, is my colleague Jeanette Patrick and I have been sponsoring internships with institutions like the Institute for Thomas Paine Studies at Iona College, in which we're building an entire course and curriculum around a particular digital project. And so this spring, we've built a project around our colonial music database. Now, I have no idea about early American music, and so I'm just as in trouble as the rest of the students who don't know any of that stuff as well. But what we've been able to do is spend 4 or 5 weeks reading about digital history, digital humanities, thinking about why it's even worthwhile doing this kind of work, what opportunities you have then, not only to bring hidden collections like Scottish Court of Session papers or early American music manuscripts alive, but then also what choices do you face in building this project? And again, getting back to this question of audience, like if you're an institution like UVA Law or Mount Vernon, where you're a very public-facing place and your goal is to promote research and teaching, you can't build a project just for the 4 or 5 people who understand this stuff. You've got to make certain choices that open them up. So we've developed our model, which is really based on the thinking that we all did with the Scottish Court of Session project, where we spend 4 or 5 weeks reading about sort of big picture stuff, thinking about methodology, thinking about the historical content. And then we give them sort of very discrete tasks in this database that we're building, so that they don't have to know what a time signature is, or stuff I don't even know about with early American music, but you give them discrete tasks that help them understand the architecture of the digital project, that also help them see and think sort of down the road how somebody might use the data that they are putting in for the benefit of a variety of different opportunities. And I'm happy to talk more about that, in Slack or whatnot, about how we're thinking about that. And it's a model I kind of would want to re-export back with the Scottish project now that we've kind of gotten that figured out. We can bring students in and do that. And I know I'm talking long, but I was to say, if we had done that, I think before with the old ways that we were doing business, before IIIF, before editor, we couldn't really do it because we had to invest so much time in teaching students not Scots law, but court of session, the particular nature of these documents, things like that. Now we've got these opportunities. We can actually get to what we want to get to.
I think there's also just to bring up our colleague Chloe Kennedy, who's in the School of Law at Edinburgh, has brought to our attention where it's both using them creatively. I mean, we've seen data visualizations using the data, but what students have been able to do to use things creatively is actually take the storytelling that's in these, what are seemingly dry documents, and take that story and storyboard it, and then either perform it or produce something artistic out of it. And so it creates that shortcut where you don't need it for a legal purpose, but you need the story as well. So there's different ways of doing it. Randy, you were going to comment.
I was actually going to kick it back to Jim and Lauren, because I think that you guys, I know you have both managed students as part of this project that have gone on to work in digital humanities, that have gone on to library school. So maybe just talking about a little bit more of the discrete tasks that they've handled, because I know they've done both the data entry side and then the storytelling that Rachel was talking about. It really can vary in terms of what students take on.
Yeah, so I think, the philosophy that we've implemented sort of collectively that is shared from the Scottish papers, but a whole host of other digital projects that we have going on at the law library, we are really blessed to have a internship program based in the Institute of Public History at UVA that we regularly have for now almost 7 years. We've had 2 or 3 interns that come work for us. And it's not a digital history class, which I think sparked this question, but what we get is we get 300 hours of a paid internship for really highly qualified, really clever students. And we use that as an opportunity to say, come in and say, here's the project we want. We know it resonates with your interests. What do you want to get from it? Because they can work with me and I can teach them how to start and manage a content management system, teach them about metadata, teach them about digitization workflows, about preservation, or they can work with Jim or Randy or whomever, or our other postdoc that we have present, and say, all right, what type of interpretive work do you want to do? What's kind of the synthetic result of your research? So we have a really, I think, pretty mature program for bringing these students in and saying, this is the variety of aspects that go into it. What do you want to dabble in, or do you want to learn it all? We did one because we have a very important collection about war crime tribunals in the Pacific after the Second World War. We had a student who came in who was really interested in doing GIS work, and we asked him to help us translate some documents, work with these documents, but the end result of that project was he created a story map in ArcGIS that showed how we connected about 35 different documents and images from other collections about US POWs in the Pacific. It was a fantastic product. And what he ended up learning was these digital workflows, best practices, but also we got to get this wonderful story that we now include in our digital collections. So that's not necessarily a DH class, but we've also had one student who wasn't interested in doing interpretive work. She worked with us for 3 years, and what she wanted to do was learn how to be a digital archivist. She scanned, I think, 45,000 images from negatives, and now she works at a museum. And I love writing recommendation letters for her. It's very exciting because she's an all-star, and it's really cool. And it's like something she wasn't even interested in it initially. She just wanted a job that she could show up at late at night and not have to talk to anybody. And now she's got a career out of it.
Yeah, and I think it's an important point. Is it sometimes, on occasion we'll get folks that come in and just want a job, but I think more often than not, people want to come in and learn stuff. And I think Lauren has rightly pointed out, one of the big questions you have to ask students is, what do you want to learn, and what is your career aspirations? Because we can sort of tailor what you do to that, and I think that's really important.
It takes it away from the actual content of the stuff. And if you think about it, in the more general terms, you could have anything of this nature, and with these tools from a collection, and with these two tools present an opportunity that either helps the student with their course or builds skills that take them on further in their careers, whether it's digital humanities, the archives, or the development aspect of things. And that creativity around use of collections, whatever they are, and having those opportunities, I think is quite, and it's an increasing ask, an increasing market for us, isn't it, in use of these collections, whatever they are, to actually use them to build skills. We certainly see that at the University of Edinburgh. You know, we're getting calls and clamoring for data sets, of which we're talking about some of these in these workshops. So people can either manipulate the data, you know, visualize the data, analyze the data. You know, it's not just about what I said, which is about the storytelling or the traditional historical research. You know, these, I'm thinking about the session papers actually, and I was going to come on to a question about what is fun about them, because, you know, that I remember the first time that I had a call with you guys, you three, and I remember how excited, because I didn't know the content of our collection, but you knew more about the content of your collection, and you were storytelling. You were kind of, but it's about this and about these people. So just for a second, just to indulge us, can you tell us something that you found in those papers that, you know, a wee story that would give us an insight into what a researcher could latch onto?
Yeah, I've got one in my mind that I need to write an article about. So I'll keep the names out of it so that you don't steal my thunder. I'm kidding. But it was, I don't know, this is about 2017, 2018. I was looking through a random box because that's what I would do on occasion. I think all three of us did. We would just sort of dip our toe in to see what was there, a material that we had not digitized yet. And I came across a Scottish firm, and I can't remember the name of the firm, but a Scottish firm who had contracted with a ship that was to sail out of Liverpool, actually. So Rachel, your neck of the woods. And it was going on a slave trading voyage. And it did the normal sort of things you would expect. They provisioned in Liverpool. They sailed south to the African coast. They went to the Gold Coast. They anchored offshore. A party of men took the longboat to go on, and so that they could negotiate and bargain for enslaved human beings. And unbeknownst to the captain who was on this longboat and his men, the first officer staged a mutiny, took control of the vessel, killed a couple of I think he killed an officer and some of the men who tried to resist that rebellion, took the ship and sailed west. And their intent was to land at South America and do God knows what with that vessel. The captain, who had heard who got wind of what had happened, took another vessel with his remaining crew and basically was in pursuit. The vessel ended up being captured by a Royal Navy vessel. This is about late 18th century, and is put into port at Barbados, where they are charged with mutiny. We have both these, and the case itself is about insurance, right? It's about who has to pay the insurance claim on a vessel that was supposed to be trading in enslaved human beings, but was captured and condemned as a prize by the Royal Navy. And you look at that document and think, I don't want to read an insurance case because I don't even like dealing with my own insurance problems. But if you start to follow the thread about what's happening, you know, you can set the insurance claim part of that aside, and you can see that this is part of Great Britain and North American slave trading in the period. This shows you how that stuff worked. This shows you the ulterior motives of some of the people on board that vessel. And it turns out I managed to find in the National Records of Scotland, actually, I had them digitized for me, the financial reports associated with keeping the crew in prison on Barbados as they were awaiting trial in an Admiralty court. And so somewhere there's an Admiralty court record of that trial. I haven't found it yet. So if anybody knows where it is, please God tell me. But it's a concrete example of how you think, oh, I don't want to read another insurance report. And by God, there's this whole other world that you suddenly find as you keep turning the page.
Absolutely. And I think the parallels there, We've got a comment from Felicia, who says that they have a collection of documents from colonial New Spain and Spanish legalese from the 17th to 19th centuries. The subject matter in these, the minute you go legal records, people, you know, but I mean, you've just described the rich content for, you know, it's myriad, isn't it? And Darren is quite right. If you go onto the National Archives website and look up Admiralty records, you probably find the reference for it and can order it.
I think that's probably where it is. I have a sneaking suspicion. I've seen references. So thank you, Daryl, and I'm looking forward to getting back over there.
Yeah. I would just want to encourage everybody to ask questions in the chat if you have them. As you can tell, we're quite happy chatting away about you know, our experiences, but it'd be really fantastic to hear if you've got experiences in digital history projects and research in this area. So do let us know in the chat and we can bring you in if you would like to. Randy.
Well, that's one of the exciting things about working with legal records, especially if I'm, you know, I don't come at it from a legal history perspective, is just how they can be hints to other collections to look at. And there's so many interesting connections you can draw. These are, you know, these are biased records, like all records are. And so understanding that bias, I think, you know, we talked about teaching students sort of these new digital skills, but also that's really critical for teaching students this very traditional history skills, how to understand personal documents. And in some ways, you know, these digital archives are particularly good for that, especially if the student's understanding how they're built. You can get not only the bias of the writer, but potentially, you know, the curator, the how it was built sort of plays into those. So that's a really, I think, important skill that students can come away with from a digital history job. But yeah, I was going to say a lot of what Jim was saying, that like these records are so fascinating for how they point you in different directions for where else to go for research. You know, my first case that I came across that was so fascinating to me was, I think it was also an insurance case, and it's about a ship that got stuck in North Carolina because of the Stamp Act riots, and it had gone through the whole, you know, lots of trade, and talked about just the individual people, the captain, the mariners, in such, you know, detail that was just really, really fascinating to me.
And I think it's really important to note as well that, and one of the things we harp on a lot when we present this collection at conferences is that it's really, as Jim already mentioned, this is a civil trial. These are civil documents, and so they're about people. They're about people interacting, and it's about businesses trying to collect money, and it's about disputed elections, and it's about, we have an essay that one of our colleagues wrote when she was deeply involved with these, called Trouble in Fashion. It's just about cultural norms in a small Scottish village, about, is a woman who dresses herself as MRS, even though they're not technically married, is she actually married, and does she deserve all of this guy's inheritance? And people disputed if they were together, and what does it mean? All these really complicated things and terms and how people describe each other. These are directly from the past, and we have language and we have stories that tell about how people related to each other or didn't relate, and so we can look for insurance cases. There's some really super important things that tell about business. There's also some really bizarre ones about insurance fraud, which are fantastic, because we have one about a ship that they basically sank off Bermuda because the guy was a terrible businessman but he said that he had a dream that the ship was going to crash before it, had a premonition, and then this court case went on for decades. And there's all this documents about this guy's dream that the ship was, does it say that it was premeditated or that it was you know, an act of God? It's crazy.
I know. I always remember the fact that you get the ordinary people, you get the mention of people who just don't exist in other records, as well as the myriad of content. I was wondering though, if by using these digital resources, we talk about with our students and our researchers, that tangible experience of turning the page, of seeing it in situ on that object that was created. You know, is there something in what you've experienced in doing digital history projects that has been taken away from the researcher that you've seen, or do you think it's just enhancement?
It's a really great question. I don't think you could ever replace the experience of looking through a physical object. Yeah. The case that Lauren was describing, we were looking at it in the Signet Library on one of our last research expeditions, and thickly bound volumes, just like in the CRC, turning the page, getting essentially the dust of history in your nose, that you can't replicate that in a digital environment. But so you want to do the best you can to honor the originality of the documents and the structural integrity. And by that, I mean the ways in which they were organized, so that you can present the researcher with objects that they can use and have the confidence that you're getting all of it. Now, mistakes are going to happen, of course. Some, we have missed pages or files have gotten out of order, and we've done our best to correct that. But then, then you have to think about the opportunity that you gain from having access. Right now, we can't access archives for COVID reasons, of course. And so this moment has made, in particular, very sort of acute the importance of having digital collections and doing this kind of work. Yeah, so I mean, it's I would rather be in an archive, truth be told. It's quieter and a lot more fun. But if I can get the material I need to have so that I can do the work I want to do, then that's super too.
Also, it'll take you an awful lot less time, as you described yesterday, to pinpoint those things than turning the page with the scale of what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And again, we know it's not replacing the work of the archivist. It's enhancing, or librarians, it's enhancing it. It's allowing us to do more and do it better. So yeah, I'm in favour. I wonder if we move on to the potential. There's some lovely comments coming in the chat about how great court records are and the material you can find, and Darren's just said about the integrity of both the data and the organisation of the data being important. We could wax lyrical about how you need that organisation and about metadata for the end research result, and how when we get it wrong, it causes no end of pain. But in terms of the potential, and if anybody wants to come in on the chat again, then let us know if you have ideas about what you could see the potential of this, or what you want to ask about the potential of this. But everything being equal in a non-pandemic world, with the tools and the resources that we have and we've created, and the focus that we've originally had, where can you see this going? Where would you, as researchers, as people with a technical background, with a librarian, what would you want in the perfect world?
I think one thing we haven't quite explored yet on our site is sort of the adventure into big data. Right. Allowing people to download large chunks of text or whatever it is, to be able to sort of systematically look at language, or systematically look at sort of the authorities that are being cited, to answer sort of big questions about that within this corpus. I think that's something that we would love to have happen.
Yeah, and I think, and moving beyond simply the session papers, I think one of the things that and just looking at the chat, people are mentioning other collections that they've used, and what I think is neat as a use case or an example that what we've done with this large collection, both from a technical standpoint of trying to develop the editor tool to be able to computationally access all the text, but it's also, I mean, it should serve as a point that there's other collections out there, and that we as curators, we as archivists know of those collections that potentially could be so much more valuable if opened up using these technologies. So I think one of the things that we're most excited about in this workshop and our partnership is that we have the opportunity to help other institutions or ourselves with other collections that have remained sort of moldering in the archives. That's not the right word. Let's say carefully preserved but unused in the shelves, in the stacks. We hope that this encourages others to take up this tool or similar tools and bring more documents to light.
Yeah, I think the editor, just to go back to the earlier point about giving the researcher a sense of sort of original order and all that, like the editor tool, our hope for it is that it can help us create sort of a catalog, maybe a case level or a document level catalog, more traditional catalog. That we don't have a case level catalog at this point. So sort of that traditional catalog that allows a researcher to understand what we have, to see what we do not have, but also what Jim was talking about yesterday, this like very specific text searching that allows someone to find where does India appear. So it's sort of allowing researchers to do both things and to sort of enable trust in research, but also enable access.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great points. I can see a really fabulous question, which is absolutely hit my buttons in the chat, which Grace says, slightly off topic. No, you're not off topic, Grace. It's absolutely on topic. How do you manage the original language in some of the digitized materials? And this absolutely is on my interest professionally, both in terms of language in its context, how that language changes over time, or how we view terminology and how we view the change in language, and how do we reflect that in descriptive terms when we're dealing with creating catalogues, or taking what was originally said in the 18th century and putting it out there. Jim, you've been talking and Randy and Lauren all talked about examples where potentially there is language around slavery. So how do we deal with that? I mean, Mike quite eloquently talks about, this is why we love working with Mike. He gets us as archivists and librarians as well, and researchers, because he talks about context, and I'm going, yes, Mike, context. But you've created further resources on that. Have you had challenges around that language?
That's a really, there's so many different ways we could talk about language in this question. So Grace, that is absolutely on point. Again, these are 18th century documents. And so, for Randy and Lauren and I, we're kind of accustomed to reading that kind of, I guess, dialect or language structure. And so, we're comfortable dealing with that kind of stuff. And then the challenge becomes, how do you make that more presentable to non-18th century specialists? How do you teach that to students who might find, language and sentence construction weird? But then also, how do you deal with some of the things you're talking about, Rachel? Because now in the modern era, we're not inclined to say slave, but enslaved, right? We're inclined to use certain terminologies that, in the example of slavery, of course, don't contribute to the further dehumanization of those individuals in those documents. And so how do we think about those questions? But then also language in general. How do we deal with, for example, in our collections, the fact that some of these cases deal with land disputes that date back into the 17th century, and some of the charters from the king were in Latin, or how do you deal with Scots language in this? We haven't seen any, at least in our collections, Gaelic yet, but I'm not going to be surprised if those show up. But definitely Scots shows up every once in a while. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, and French, and you'd be surprised. It says Scottish Court of Session papers, but there are quite a few other languages. I'm conscious of time, and there's a really other great question coming from Ellen. Hi, Ellen, about the complexities of doing this kind of work, particularly as predominantly white institutions at scale, and talking about the decolonializing description and embracing redescription. That is consciously being discussed and embedded in the work that we do at the University of Edinburgh, completely holding our hands up to the fact that we will need help. We do not have all of the answers, and we will need to get together with our colleagues, with experts who have experience, and also debate around this. Mm-hmm. So do you have experience of dealing with this as well? I'm not saying we have any of the answers at the University of Edinburgh, but we are looking at our responsibilities and the ethics around this, most definitely. Yeah.
And Rachel, you and I had just a few days ago, when we were thinking about our panel for tomorrow, we had this very same conversation about trying to think about language. I think is probably the overarching term, but I think one of the things that we do as archivists is we describe things, and we make impositions on subjects like images and text we interpret them using our own biases to make them available. And, you know, one of the things that we're trying to be mindful of, even in the most simple things that we do, is coming up with a title for an image. Is if you see two individuals in it, they look like young boys, it's best to not make an assumption about who those people are as individuals, and simply say those are two young children, or those are two people photographed in front of a building. So I think that also applies to how we use terms to describe people. And Jim, I think, is really, really important about thinking of enslaved persons as agents and not as being acted upon by enslavers. And I think that is one of the ways that's really key for us when we describe the historical subjects, is to be conscious of the bias we have. And we're not perfect, as you said, and we're constantly learning, and we have to ask people who are experts in this, who have thought or are more clever than us at it, and be responsive to those ways of describing our historical subjects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I'd say oh, sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
I was
to say from a research perspective too, it's being aware of what you know and what you don't know, and so you know, if you know, for example, there might be some materials which are you know, speak to different historical subjects of which, you know, I'm not an expert, and so it's an opportunity to say, you know, reach out to my colleagues who are and say, hey, you know, we've got these materials, I think you might be interested in them. You know this field very, very well. You know, what can you tell us about them? Or, you know, are you inclined to use them in a particular way? You know, how can they advance your work in ways that we are incapable of doing? You know, and we can't make the contributions to your field that you can, but you know, perhaps these might be something of use for you in thinking about your own research and teaching.
I think that brings us to a nice point about collaboration. And to solve some of these problems, it is around collaboration and about, you know, communities coming together who work in these areas to talk about these things, and inviting people in, I think, as well, both to the research community and to the archival and library and other professions, you know, to inform us of how we can explore those things. Well, I'm clear. Are there any last thoughts from Randy, Lauren, and Jim? No.
I'll just say, you know, hit us up in the Slack channel. We're happy to talk about any aspect of the project and how we might work together. Fantastic.
Well, thank you all three of you for your contributions, and to everybody who's posted lovely comments or very engaging, interesting, insightful questions into the chat, which I think has brought a really interesting conversation to a lovely close. We're going to have a break now, and then the next session is going to be on exploring the Lyle collection, how to draw out from that particular collection. So moving from session papers here to Lyle with my colleagues Daryl Green, Elaine McGilvery and Elise Ramsey. So go and enjoy your break. Hit us in the Slack channel with questions, and we will see you soon. Thanks.